Good morning, friends. Another chapter. God's grace keeps pace. This is chapter 8. Praise You in the Storm, another of my very favorite songs. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make straight your paths. That's Proverbs 3 5 through 6. As the weeks flew by and the temperature grew hotter, and the Oklahoma humidity rose, it was shocking to find that the weather had a terrible effect on Jan's seizures. One day I ran errands with both kids, and when we got back into the hot car, Jan began to seizure almost immediately. We learned if we were outside for more than a few minutes when the temperature was over 70, seizures would break through. Our world became the confines of our air conditioned home. Someone had to stay with Jan if I needed to buy groceries if the temps were in the 70s or above. In spite of that, we patterned Jan twice a day and kept a fan blowing directly on her, and we kept the thermostat of our house set low. I wondered if we'd make it to the Institute. In the late fall, we received a call telling us that Jan's appointment had been moved to February the 19th. We were elated. Now, if we could survive just a few more months, we'd have help. In the meantime, the neurologist continued to increase Jan's seizure medication in an effort to control her seizures. Instead of them getting better, they got worse, particularly at night. Once again, I became so exhausted that I failed to wake up as quickly as needed. Jan's seizures were called focal seizures. When one hit her, her little body became unbelievably stiff and her head jerked involuntarily and painfully to her left. Her lip quivered and the corner of her mouth pulled downward to the left, as well as her left arm pulled behind her body as her eyes rolled back into her head. With each seizure, she'd scream out with a blood-curdling cry of pain. They just horrified me. I learned I could bring her out of the seizure if I was able to get her into a sitting position and lean her over. However, her body was inflexible and she was very strong, even though she was a skinny little thing. It took every ounce of strength I could muster to sit her up and then bend her rigid little body forward. As this continued night after night, I reached a point where I slept through the seizures that occurred nearer to morning because I was just too tired to wake up. Sleeping on the floor next to her seemed the solution, but toward dawn, I still didn't always wake up. By the time I would awake, Jan's fever would be 104 to 106 because her thermostat was damaged. Didn't mean an infection, it was just the thermostat. I found her sweating profusely, and many times not only would she have thrown up, but she would have bitten her mouth as well, and she'd be covered in blood. It was just horrible. I'd grab her, fight to bend her body upright, run to the kitchen, sit her in the sink, and drench her with the sprayer and my tears as I attempted to bring her temperature down. By December, as Jan neared her first Christmas and her first birthday, she was on so much seizure medication that she didn't respond to anything. She never smiled or even acted like she knew she was alive. Shopping for Christmas presents that year was an ordeal of sadness and grief. As I walked down the aisle shopping for Ben's gifts, tears ran down my cheeks. My knees shook a bit because I found myself on the aisle of the little girl's dolls. I knew Jan would pay them no attention. My heart ached as I remembered the Christmas before when we were expectantly awaiting her birth. How excited we'd been and what dreams we'd had. It seemed as if that Christmas was many years ago, and I felt like an old woman. God, will it ever be normal again? We decided to drive to Alabama and spend Christmas with my sister and her family. I was so exhausted and so close to our situation that I didn't realize how frail and sick Jan really was. I'm sure it was a very hard trip on her little body. Thankfully, my mom met us there and rode back to Oklahoma with us. She'd spend the rest of the winter, as she had the year before, with us. After our return trip to Oklahoma, Jan cried all night. Her fever climbed higher and higher. On her first birthday, we had no celebration. Instead, Jan was admitted to the hospital. Knowing how desperately I needed rest, our doctor deliberately placed Jan on a ward where I wasn't allowed to stay. Each morning as I went to visit her, it grieved my heart to realize she didn't seem to recognize my presence. Oh Lord, will she ever know how much she is loved? Please, God, remember my prayer. Let her know us and feel joy and love. Allow her to be happy, Lord. The long awaited trip, the institute appointment that had seemed so far away, finally arrived. Thankfully, Jan had for the most part recovered from her first birthday hospitalization. The night before we left for our long awaited appointment, we asked our deacons and church staff to come to our home and to pray over Jan. We based our request on James chapter 5, called the elders of the church. That was rather new to us and our deacon body as well, the laying on of hands, but they graciously consented to honor our request. As they gathered around Jan in our den and prayed, it was an encouraging time. It served as a reminder that our faith and hope were in God and what He'd do through the program, not in the program. The next day, on February the 18th, we flew into Philadelphia Airport for the first time. At 13 months old, Jan weighed 13 pounds and still wore newborn size clothing. For the trip, I'd made her a little long red dress with white lacy trim. Her legs still looked like toothpicks, and the long dress covered those little legs. I sadly overheard someone say, "Look at that poor little baby. She is so sick." And I was so close to the situation, I remember wondering, how can they tell? Nonetheless, Jan had survived to make her appointment. That's what we'd been praying for. We checked into a hotel in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, excited and scared over the new lifestyle we hoped to soon embark on. We rose early the next morning. Our appointment was at 8:30. We wanted to make certain we allowed plenty of time to find the institute. To our dismay, an unexpected snowstorm had dumped 14 inches of snow while we slept. We had trouble finding our rental vehicle in the massive parking lot of snow buried vehicles. Of course, it was a white vehicle. This was long before key fobs and alarm buttons were invented, so we relied on our bare hands to locate our snow buried white rental car. When we finally found it, we proceeded to dig it out with our gloveless hands. Mike warmed it up and we began our treacherous journey to Jan's appointment. At one point, we were stuck behind a long line of snowbound cars. Finally, Mike was so determined to get to our appointment on time that he drove up on the median and traveled some distance that way. I held Jan tightly and I just closed my eyes and prayed. Finally, we were able to get back on the street. A little obstacle like 14 inches of snow and a bunch of snow-bound cars was not going to stop us from making our long-awaited appointment. Finally, 8801 Stenton Avenue loomed before us. Never had a sign been so thrilling to see. The Institute for the Achievement of Human Potential. We made it in an unfamiliar rental car through 14 inches of snow. Thank you, Lord. The Institute was housed in a neighborhood of sprawling walled estates built in the early 1920s. The Institute itself was founded in 1955 and was internationally known for its pioneering work in brain development. They had bought an old estate with many acres of land so they could expand. As we carefully turned into the long lane, the snow blanketed grounds were an amazing sight to our eyes. The expansive acreage was filled with these huge old trees, pines, tall oaks, birches, and dogwoods, all blanketed in that fresh 14 inches of snow. It was just breathtakingly beautiful. Only God could have created such an amazing winter wonderland. We were the first to arrive that snowy morning, followed shortly by a couple from Italy. Before the day was over, we'd met parents and their broken children from all over the United States and the world. They'd come from South Africa, Italy, Germany, Japan, and Spain. Immediately, we shared a strong bond. We'd all brought our broken children, that the world considered helpless. The Institute only accepts children with brain damage. So on the first day, they test to see who is suitable for the program. We were fairly certain that Jan would be accepted because we knew she had brain damage. That first appointment lasted until 2 a.m., almost 18 hours. I was amazed at the expertise and the care of the staff. No details seemed to escape them. By the time that late night appointment was over, we'd learned more about Jan's condition than we had learned in the previous 13 months. Amazing. We learned that Jan was profoundly brain damaged and her neurological age was that of a 2 2/10 months old. Now she was 13 months old. By dividing her neurological age by her chronological age of 13 months, we found that Jan was 16% of normal. The rest of the week, the specialists at the Institute developed a program for Jan and trained us to put it into effect. We would attempt to train Jan's undamaged brain cells to assume the duties of her damaged cells. It'd be a very strenuous program, one that we'd daily execute from our home. It would require around 60 people a week to help put it into action. People that we'd train. We were ready for anything that would help Jan and our family. After a week of intense training, we were both exhausted and exhilarated. We'd been on a downhill path for 13 months, but now we had a set of instructions from people who seemed to know the way off that downhill descent. We left with goals to be reached and a path to get there. Plus, we would attempt to reach our first goal by our next visit in 3 months. We couldn't imagine how we were going to accomplish all that was expected of us. Equipment had to be built and additional patterners found, but we knew with God's help we'd do it, and we did. God's grace keeping pace. In my hard places, God taught me how close He walked with me. He continually reminded me He held the future and He was worthy of my trust. Let's keep looking for glimpses of God's grace. It's always there, always. We just have to look with an expectant heart. Thank you. That's the end of chapter 8. And there's a picture. I'll see if I can show it to you. I never know quite where to get it, but you can see how thin and skinny Jan's legs were. Thank you.